The house felt strangely empty as I sat in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by the eerie stillness of the night. My husband was on a business trip, and our children were spending the weekend at their grandparents' house. It was just me and the silence, and it was unsettling. I'd always cherished my moments of solitude, relishing the rare occasions when I could have the house to myself. But tonight was different. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, casting long, menacing shadows that danced on the walls. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity. The wind howled outside, creating an unsettling symphony of creaks and groans from the old house. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words seemed to blur together, and my thoughts kept wandering to the dark corners of the room. As the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'd always considered myself a rational person, scoffing at tales of the supernatural. But tonight, reason seemed to escape me. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent shivers down my spine. I decided to turn on the TV, hoping that the noise and the glow of the screen would dispel my unease. I settled on a mindless sitcom, the laugh track providing a false sense of companionship. But even the familiar faces on the screen couldn't chase away the nagging fear that gnawed at the edges of my mind. Midnight arrived, and with it came a deafening silence. The TV had gone to commercial, and I hesitated to turn it back on. The room felt oppressive, as though the walls were closing in on me. I knew it was all in my head, but that didn't make it any less real. I decided to make some tea, hoping the warmth would soothe my nerves. As I stood in the kitchen, the faucet began to drip, each drop echoing like a distant drumbeat. I tightened the faucet, but the dripping continued, slow and deliberate. My heart raced as I glanced around the dimly lit kitchen. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, and I couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was lurking just beyond my field of vision. I returned to the living room, clutching my cup of tea, but the unease only intensified. I knew I needed to calm down, to regain control of my racing thoughts. I decided to call my husband, hoping to hear his voice and find comfort in his words. But as I dialed his number, the phone emitted a strange, garbled sound, as though the call were being intercepted. I hung up, my hands trembling, and tried again. This time, the call went through, but all I heard on the other end was static. I tried to shake off the fear that gripped me and headed upstairs to our bedroom. Maybe lying down would help me relax, I thought. But as I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, a soft whisper echoed through the room. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, straining to hear the faint words. It was as if someone were speaking just beyond my range of hearing, their voice barely audible. Come, the word hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. I strained to listen, but the voice had faded into nothingness. I told myself it was a trick of the wind, a figment of my imagination, but my heart raced and my palms grew clammy. I reached for my phone, determined to call the police, but it was dead. The battery had drained inexplicably. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled out of bed, searching for a flashlight. As I fumbled through the darkened house, my footsteps echoed eerily in the silence. The air felt heavy, as though charged with an unseen presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. The flashlight's feeble beam illuminated the hallway as I made my way to the front door. I had to get out to escape the suffocating grip of the house. But as I reached for the doorknob, a voice whispered in my ear, cold and malevolent, "You can't leave." I screamed, spinning around, but there was no one there. My pulse raced, and I stumbled backward, desperate to escape the unseen presence that seemed to be closing in on me. I fled to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, and huddled in the corner. The darkness pressed in on me, and I could hear faint whispers, as though a multitude of voices were murmuring just beyond the walls. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I had lost all sense of time. I clutched my knees to my chest, my body trembling as the whispers grew louder more insistent. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the voices stopped. The house fell into an eerie silence once more, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. I don't know how long I stayed in that bathroom, too afraid to move, too afraid to leave. But eventually, the first faint rays of dawn filtered through the window, casting a feeble light on the floor. With trembling hands, I unlocked the bathroom door and ventured out into the house. It was empty, just as it had been before. The feeling of being watched had vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. I called my husband, who returned home later that day, but I couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. I told myself it had all been a hallucination, a manifestation of my own fear and anxiety. But deep down, I knew that something had been in that house with me, something unseen and malevolent. The memory of that night haunted me, a lingering presence that would forever cast a shadow over my solitude, a reminder that in the darkness, the line between reality and nightmare can blur, and the silence can be more terrifying than any scream.
The clock on the wall read 3 a.m., and the silence in the house was so thick that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. My husband was away on a business trip, and I had volunteered to dog sit for a friend. The dog, a friendly Labrador named Max, was sleeping soundly at my feet, oblivious to the unease that was settling over me. I had never been particularly fond of staying home alone, especially at night, but my husband's absence had left me with no choice. I decided to make the most of it, watching a movie in the dimly lit living room. As the movie played on, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my friend who owned Max, asking if everything was okay. I assured her that everything was fine and that Max was sleeping peacefully. She thanked me and said she'd be back to pick him up in the morning. I settled back into the couch, trying to focus on the movie, but a feeling of unease lingered. It wasn't an unfamiliar sensation. My overactive imagination often got the best of me when I was alone at night. I decided to brush it off, chalking it up to the eerie quiet of the house. A sudden chill in the room made me shiver, and I wrapped the blanket tighter around me. Max stirred, raising his head and staring toward the hallway. His ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. I tried to calm him, assuming he had heard a noise outside, but his gaze remained fixed on the hallway. I paused the movie and listened intently. The only sound was the distant ticking of the clock. I chided myself for getting spooked and tried to coax Max back to sleep. Just as he was settling down, a faint sound reached my ears, a soft scratching, like someone running their fingernails along the wall. My heart skipped a beat, and I held my breath, straining to hear more clearly. The scratching continued, growing louder and more deliberate. It was coming from the hallway, just outside the living room. Max had now gone from growling to barking furiously, his hackles raised. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and dialed my husband's number. But there was no answer. I tried again and again, each attempt met with the same result, no response. The scratching at the hallway grew louder, more insistent, as though someone, or something, was trying to get in. Panic surged through me, and I realized I had to call for help. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. She assured me that help was on the way and advised me to stay on the line. I clung to the phone, my eyes fixed on the hallway, where the scratching had now turned into a low, guttural growl. The minutes passed like hours, and the growling continued, growing more menacing with each passing moment. Max was now barking uncontrollably, his fur bristling, as though he were confronting an intruder. Then, suddenly, the growling ceased and the hallway fell into an eerie silence. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear the operator's voice in my ear, urging me to stay on the line. With the phone still in hand, I edged cautiously toward the hallway, where Max was now whimpering, his tail tucked between his legs. I peered into the darkness, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just as I was about to return to the safety of the living room, a voice whispered my name, a soft, sinister whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sarah. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was unmistakably my husband's, but it was distorted, cold, and malevolent. "Sarah, come closer." My heart pounded, and I couldn't move. The voice seemed to be coming from all around me, as though the very walls themselves were speaking. I clutched the phone, my fingers trembling, but the operator's voice was gone. "Sarah, don't be afraid. Come closer." I took a hesitant step forward, drawn by the familiar voice, despite the terror that gripped me. The hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, the walls closing in around me. As I reached the end of the hallway, I saw the bedroom door slightly ajar, the room beyond shrouded in darkness. The voice called to me from inside, and I couldn't resist the compulsion to push the door open. The room was empty, but the voice grew stronger, more insistent, as though it were right beside me. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing there. "Sarah, don't be afraid." The voice surrounded me, enveloping me in an icy chill. I felt a presence in the room, something unseen but undeniably malevolent. The air grew heavy, and I struggled to breathe. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The room fell into silence, broken only by my own ragged breaths. I stumbled out of the room and fled down the hallway, my heart pounding, my mind in turmoil. I could hear sirens approaching in the distance, the wailing of the police car growing louder. When the police arrived, they searched the house, but found no sign of an intruder. They assured me that everything was secure and that it was safe to stay in the house. But I knew they were wrong. I could still hear the voice, whispering in the shadows, taunting me with its chilling words. And I knew that I would never be truly alone again, that something had come into my home that night, something uninvited, something that would haunt me for the rest of my days.